There's that discussion about the Jubilee administration's agenda, 4-point agenda, President Uhuru Kenyatta's 4-point agenda, housing, healthcare, and food security, and all the manufacturing as well. But there are those who say that the same way that Jubilee Party has taken over parliament with the tyranny of numbers, they enjoy the same kind of tyranny at the Council of Governors. They have the majority of governors, and therefore it appears that the Council of Governors is turning its sights and focusing more on what the national government is doing, as opposed to each county charting its own path of development. Is there a risk when counties decide to do that? Because yes, it is one thing to align your budgets and development agenda to the national government, but it's totally another to follow the whims of a political party.
Well, it may not entirely be a bad thing. I think counties were created primarily to respond to the unique problems of the people at the grassroots and bring service delivery closer to the people down there. That must be preserved at all costs, irrespective of what national government is doing up there. But I see a window of opportunity here. You see, the Constitution says that the county and national government are distinct but interdependent. There is a certain level of collaboration that is conceived in the Constitution. The window that I see in this is that if Jubilee and Uhuru has this legacy he wants to create, and the big four, health, manufacturing, you will create jobs for you, that will resonate with people down there. We've just said how health is a big problem, and the model that Makueni has come up with. A synergy between national government in terms of these four will ensure that county government dedicate time and resources towards this, and the national government as well will channel and pump resources. There is a possibility that you could also get donor funding on issues like health. So I see that if the county and national government focus, and we were thinking like we were saying, for example, Nairobi County and these big four, I think for Nairobi we probably think about housing. If you're going to build 30,000, those are the figures I've had, 30,000 housing in this first year. That is a flagship thing that will help lift some burden, because we are looking what can Sonko do. So if, for example, the Mike Sonko aligned himself with one of those big four and say, in my first 2 years, I want to see housing. Jericho, they started it in Kibera, low-cost housing. Take it to Jericho, Embakasi, Madare. I think that will help direct some positive energy into, because when you're building houses, you will definitely have to sort out infrastructure, and you have to think sewage, and you have to think water. Those things come together. So I think that each governor has to find out of these big four what works for me. If I was Sonko, I'll probably go housing, because with housing will come a number of things: water, sanitation, and sewage. So this synergy working together may not be a bad thing.
What do you think of the same? The fact that now counties appear to be aligning the development projects to the same, the one for the national government?
I think it's a good thing, because the overall national development roadmap for Kenya is under Vision 2030. So when we look at 2030 and then we cascade it down, all the big four projects are actually canvassed under Vision 2030. And then when you look at the aspect that Mheshimiwa has raised about interdependence, when you look at all this Schedule 4 and the functions that are devolved, all policy functions still remain at the national government. Therefore, we start at the point where we realize that you cannot achieve anything at the counties without in isolation of the national government. Therefore, the idea that county governments are now thinking of adopting and realigning their development goals with the big four is a good thing, because again, the big four is a revolutionary agenda in itself. When you look at an aspect that a plan which wants to deliver universal healthcare to all Kenyans. If we talk about the Makueni model, then we are now going to talk about the Kenyan model of universal healthcare. Then it's a good thing. Food security has been a perennial problem. This idea that almost 60 years after independence, we still have presidential candidates campaigning on the platform that will bring you water, I'll make sure you have roads, and food should be sorted once and for all. And through the big four, I think when you look at them, that the first, I think in priority, healthcare is biggest. Food security, manufacturing, and housing. When that is sorted, it cannot be achieved at the national level, because again, where is this platform where national government operates, where there is no county government? Everywhere there is national government, there is actually a county government. Yes. Therefore, the aspect of cooperation, interdependence, and complementarity is actually, it's a given. It cannot, they have to work together to achieve that.
But there's some counties which are run by governors who are not necessarily from Jubilee, they're from other parties, and they may find it a challenge to actually be seen to be aligning their development goals to that of President Uhuru Kenyatta. What should such a governor do?
And that's why I think my colleagues have said, I think we should anchor, most of these counties anchor their focus on Vision 2030, because Vision 2030 will carry along all these things. And what I think Jubilee did, they simply picked 4 out of the so many things of Vision 2030. Of course, they picked on manufacturing, which I guess they wanted to focus on the issue of either creating jobs and, of course, the housing issues like health and food security. But what I would say is that they should look at the bigger picture, because when you look at now, for example, Vision 2030, they're talking of universal education, for example, education for all, which to me is very critical. And while, of course, the 4 items by Jubilee are critical, there could be others that are unique and as well very important. And I think what counties should be able to do, much as, of course, they would want to focus on Big 4, they should be able to customize and say what is so unique and what is important for our people, as opposed simply trying to follow this Agenda 4 thing that is actually not possibly serving the interests of their locals. I think if they take that Vision 2030 model and try to see which would work better for them, the better. If there are some issues in the 4-point agenda thing, they pick and see, for example, now we are talking of manufacturing. If you go to some counties and you find there's nothing to manufacturing, they have no capacity even to do that, how would that be useful to the people in that particular county? If you go to others, you find the issues of food security is not a problem. You go to Kiambu here, I don't think they have issues to do the food. But when you go to places like, for example, Kitui or Northeastern, that it becomes a challenge. So I think it's about how you would want to pick and what are the issues facing the people, what are people saying, what do they want with this. And I think that was the essence of devolution, trying to understand the issues facing the people and trying to translate or give them what they want.
Yes. But isn't there a risk, therefore, that because of the push and pull, especially for disbursement of monies from the national government to the counties, that probably the national government could use that as leverage, that if you do not align your development goals towards what the president wants, we could slow down?
Yes, that is a possibility. It shouldn't happen, because the reason we devolved resources and power from Treasury and central government was precisely that, so that you don't have to be in government or have supported the government of the day in the last election to be able to benefit. Really, it's simple mathematics. I mean, the law says that division of revenue will be based on the last exchequer's revenue collection, the most up to date. And I know that the Public Accounts Committee right now is trying to do its best so that we bring ourselves to the current level. If it gets to the point where the government will be doing that, I think it would be unfortunate, but it is entirely conceivable that the government will want to leverage, dangle the carrot and say, give us an assurance you will be doing a Big 4 agenda. You saw in the last 5 years, the government entered into this question of purchase of equipment. People were made to sign contracts, and they told you were given dialysis machines and things we don't even use, things that are lying there. So I hope that doesn't happen. I hope they allow countries to pick something and run with it. If housing works in Nairobi and that's the only thing that the government can do with Nairobi County, I think it should be good enough for the government and say, look, in the last 5 years, we have revolutionized Nairobi in terms of one of the Big 4. we've gone to Northeastern and another place, and on food security, pick up things and then say, you don't need to have done this in all the counties. If you can say in Makueni we've done healthcare, and in Nyanza and in Northeastern 3 out of 47, I mean, that's something to build on with the next administration. And in housing, we perfected it in Nairobi and Mombasa and all this. So I think it will have to be a pick and priority issue, and the government will do best to try and ask counties, tell us where we can work best together.
We've seen a number of governors even troop into State House, for across both, some Jubilee governors, some who are not necessarily Jubilee, and they've come out and declared, yes, now we will align our goals with those of government. But there are those who are not even close to the president, have never been seen anywhere close to State House. Do you think even them, they feel the pressure to do that?
Well, I'll take you back to the previous 5 years of devolution. There was a program that the national government was running, which was on free maternal health care. It was actually pioneered by an idea of the national government. But when many governors were going to the campaigns, this is one of the things they used to really say, I did this. So when you look at the Big Four as a national good and not just characterizing it as tied to an individual, then we'll be able to get a bigger picture. And it's good that right now we are seeing that level of cooperation, that governors are engaging with national government, not based on political affiliation, but because of the developmental needs that exist in their counties. Most of them, when they go there to, maybe there is a delegation, there are specific issues that arise out of that. And one of the things that Kenya should aspire for going forward right now is that in the last 5 years, we had a council of governors whose leadership was seen as being more militant or activist, to the extent that they positioned themselves at loggerheads with the executive. So most of the time, they were clashing rather than working in cooperation. If you have a council of governors that is able to cultivate cohesion and friend relationships within themselves, like they have always done, then that becomes a starting point of having a sober discussion about how do we deliver development to our people without specifically allocating to it a political lens or a value to it. Therefore, at the end of the day, when it comes to 2022 and they are going for re-election, you say, I did this. It was in my county. Then everybody,
whether or not
President Uhuru will have his legacy,
wanted,
and at the counties, people will have actually had their issues addressed. So the challenge is that we need to have more cordial relationships, because the idea of the two levels of government is complementarity, working together. They are distinct but interdependent. And if at all there is any attempt to stifle the operations of counties, then we have Senate. So we expect that the Senate that we have this time around is able to safeguard the interests of counties and not just exist focusing on other issues that are not actually county specific.
Okay. On that one?
I would say that, yes, let's look at the Big Four in the context of the national good. And if you look through the lenses of national good, yes, obviously, then again that serves everyone right. We must not personalize to say these are for Uhuru and therefore if we don't, then becomes a problem. But I think as we support the Big Four, because again they will serve the bigger good, let's also allow a window of saying, let's look at the counties as of different or unique issues, so that we don't tie everything to the Big Four. We could still allow other things that will also serve the national good and will serve the public good, so that as you run the Big Four, you still can run other issues that are serving the national good and the public good. Yes, so that we don't simply tie into the Big Four, and if we don't serve Big Four, then obviously it means we are not politically correct. No, it should be, what is it that we are getting out of this as a Kenyans? What are we getting this as a people? And therefore, once we leave it, so that we don't tie all the governance to the Big Four, and therefore if we are not doing the Big Four, then we have no business. Let's also look at it. The Big Four is good for the country, but what other issues are also facing this country that are equally important? And government should also be alive to this, so that they also come and support this. As they support their Big Four, they could also support other issues that are unique and challenges facing Kenyans.
Okay. Yeah. Now the theme of this 5th annual Devolution Conference is delivering the devolution promise of sustainable, productive, effective and efficient government for result delivery. But okay, well, it's been a nice piece of writing there, but what are the real issues that we are looking at this time? This is the 5th such conference. Of course, the first year, the first annual conference that was held, people were talking about staffing issues and things like those. But where we are right now, what do you think should be making headlines from the discussions at that conference in Kakamega?
I think we should be focusing right now on once and for all solving the question about the tension between national government and county government in terms of release of funds. Where exactly is the problem? I think, to be fair, for the first time, I think between the two levels of Parliament, the Division of Revenue Bill was passed without any acrimony, and I think that's a good thing. I think one of the things the two levels decided is that synergy is important so that we release ourselves into doing other things. So I think the focus now should be in terms of the monies that each county gets, what has been delivered, what is not being delivered, and where is the problem. We need to start unlocking and doing a SWOT analysis in terms of are we getting money, value for money. It's good and politically correct to say, you know, national government has not released money, but in terms of the expertise, the capacity to absorb and the capacity to utilize the finances, we need to put a lens on the county governments themselves. Are they working? Number two, I think we need to get to counties to tell Kenyans what measures are they putting in place in terms of revenue collection. Because the national government, I think the cash that we give to county governments must be tied to the revenue collections and the ability of the county governments to be able themselves to collect revenue. If and when it becomes impossible for a county to show that they can sustain themselves, we must also start having a third conversation: which of these counties should we wind up? As we consider the first issue that I said, can we take Nairobi County into another separate special level of management, possibly co-management, or possibly taking it into national government? We must also get into the conversation whether we need 47 counties. I know there will be a lot of acrimony on this, but I think it's a conversation we need to start having. Some counties are simply not sustainable.
Well, I'm not sure if that will feature the conference, but it is a conversation that we definitely should have. Bwana Kipkule, what kind of headlines, what kind of expectations should we have from this conference? Well,
first of all, the main purpose, the objectives of the Devolution Conference is to take stock of the devolution process so far, to see what have been the key challenges and what are the gains. And clearly, I think even as we sit here, we know what the gains are, where the challenges are. So building from that position where they take stock, then the next point is to look at what opportunities exist in terms of strengthening the capacity of counties to deliver services to the people and ensuring that they are better positioned in terms of ensuring the devolution agenda works. So going forward, one of the key issues that has been identified, and is even an headline item, is on the issue of the disbursement of funds. And a challenge that Mheshimiwa alluded to earlier is that as the Constitution says, the disbursement should be based on the latest audited accounts. But we realize that sometimes when we say now, probably it's maybe national government says we are giving you 30% of the latest audited accounts. And a budget of maybe 2013, if you operate with that as a baseline, will be lower. The allocation will be lower. And we operated on maybe the most current budget, then counties are losing more money because, again, the institutions which are charged with the responsibility to make sure that even these audits are undertaken within the shortest time possible, and that when we base our percentages on the latest one, then we are actually working with the latest, then we are operating at parity. Because that is why you see national government maintains most of the monies. So when you go to that level, again, when we start addressing the issues of the funds issue, funding of counties, we want to also look at the idea of counties also playing a commensurate role in terms of raising their own internal revenue raising capacities, and this is largely addressed. It will be largely addressed if now counties start focusing on development, which is why I load the big four because of the focus on manufacturing. If counties have a strengthened manufacturing focus, and they are able to produce more at the county level, then their revenues at that level will go up. So the idea is take stock of devolution, where we are, the challenges, look at the models that are emerging. The Makueni model is coming up very well. So is it possible to be rolled out across the country? And then as an outcome, then maybe there should be a national framework of cooperation. They should talk about it and say, from here now, we are going to work apart from the official lines that we know it's defined in law and everything, that we need. We even have an affirmation of cooperation between the county governments, the council of governors and the national government towards actualizing these things. So if you have got counties that have stronger capacity and they're able to deliver services to the people, then those will be lovely headlines for Kenyans.
Okay. Yeah. And of course, as it emerges, money is a big story. How much money comes from national government, when it comes. There's that push and pull between national government and county governments when money is disbursed, there are delays and all these things. But a lot has to be said about the counties themselves and their capacities to actually spend this money and do it prudently. At least 33 counties still have questions to answer before this audit queries, the capacity to even receive this money and spend it. Surely that should be part of the discussion, how counties are able to account for this money.
It's true. First and foremost, I would say devolution model that we adopted in Kenya is one of the most expensive, and that is for sure. Because when you look through countries like Rwanda, they still have counties and devolution, but you look at the model that they adopted, is more friendlier, is not very costly, and so forth. But Kenya, we adopted a very expensive and costly model of devolution. Almost same level like the advanced countries like the United States, where states are independent and able even to generate their own resources. And therefore we went to that, when we know very well that in Kenya some counties can almost generate nothing. And therefore I think we may at some point, and that's why these devolution conferences are very important, is to reflect and say, is it working for Kenya as it is or not? And if not, going forward, what is it that we are supposed to do? And therefore, again, number 2 is about the best practices. If it's about what is it that which country is doing good in what, and therefore how can there be issues of now trying to complement one another, and I think that is important. But if we leave devolution as it is in Kenya, I'm telling you, we are like running 2 parallel governments, where there is a national government with a president and ministers and everything, and the county government there's a governor, and almost the same thing. So to me, my personal opinion going forward is that the model that Kenya adopted for devolution is very expensive and may not be sustainable.
And we should probably review it.
And at some point, it may call for review.
Okay. Such a review would require a referendum, I'm certain.
Yeah, and which is coming in the next 1 year.
And that's a discussion I want us to go to now. But yes, we're talking about the need to change, adjust a few things in this document that we adopted in 2010. Some of these questions now, yes, how exactly are we doing in terms of devolution? Should Nairobi be taken back to national government? Should we wind up some of these counties? And of course, should we widen and change the structure of the executive to actually increase the positions up there? Helen, I've seen on page 8 of the Daily Nation where ODM has clashed with the DP. Ruto over calls for change. Deputy President says Jubilee is focused on its poll pledges and will not be distracted by premature campaigns. That has been the discussion the whole of last week, and the Deputy President has come out clearly that he does not support talks of a referendum, discussions to change the structure of the executive, and any other question that may come out. But ODM is keen on pushing through with this. Given the kind of political atmosphere we're looking at after that handshake, don't you think that that is going to be a problem? Do you think that that push for referendum now is ripe?
I think I find it strange, the position that has been adopted by the Deputy President. Let's go back to the last referendum. The last referendum, I think the Deputy President was in the no campaign, and the platform then was that let's sort out that messy 20% before we go into the election. Therein lied a recognition that the Constitution, the way it was, had some things that needed to be sorted out. I think among those things that needed to be sorted out was the structure of government itself. You remember for a long time, it is the Bomas model that was what was in vogue and generally accepted across the political divide. We don't know what happened, but in Naivasha, at the very last minute, I think if I read the politics of what I've heard about what happened in Naivasha, they were supporting the Bomas model until the one side realized that if Mathuki is the one who is supporting this, we must go on the opposite side. So they shifted to the presidential side. I think also second point that I want to make is that I agree with the Deputy President. You cannot and should not change the Constitution in order to suit one person or in order to create positions. I want to persuade him that that is not what is the case right now. I think it is 8 years going to 10 years. It's a good enough time for us to evaluate the structure that we adopted. Is it working or is it not working for us? And I think in the last 3 successive elections, we have come to the realization that the political tension that ensues immediately or before after the election is the winner-take-it-all approach or attitude that is engraved or entrenched into the Constitution. We adopted a structure where if you're not president or deputy president, and if you don't make it into those two, then you're out of the political code for 5 years. That goes into one of the key issues, because when you're talking about that handshake, people are saying that this thing is supposed to benefit a few royal families. But look at the 42 tribes. There is a question of exclusivity in the constitution that we adopted. And in every successive elections, 2 or 3 communities will continuously be at the apex of power and the rest of them out. And when the two, for example, like Jubilee set up, if government was being divided, 1/3 of government, of cabinet, or PSS, whatever it is, would go to one side of Jubilee and the other side to the deputy president, with a little token being given to Northeastern Province because Duale and the other people come out from there. So I think there is a need for us to go into this and revisit what happens to the other tribe every 5 years. And that is why the issue of inclusivity becomes a key question that we need to solve when you're talking about this constitution. Last point that I want to make is really not a legal argument, but a political one. We have this saying in the political persuasion where I come from, that there are 3 rules. Rule number 1, like we always say, and this is on a light note, is that Raila is always right. Rule number 2 is that Raila is never wrong. Rule number 3 is that when you are in doubt of rule number 1 and 2, fall back to rule number 1. Either way, Raila is always right. So I thought that in Jubilee, Uhuru's word that we needed to cool down temperatures, come back and have a national conversation, and the issue of handshake, I thought in Jubilee, Uhuru's word would be law. But it looks like rule number 1 is that Uhuru is right, and then rule number 2, refer and find out whether Ruto agrees with it or not. And I think there is need for synergy as deputy president, that he aligns himself with the vision of his flag bearer.
Curiously, the president has been very quiet on this issue, the kind of push for referendum. Of course, I'm assuming that if at all we get to that point of a referendum, it's when we'll address quite a number, not just about the structure of the executive, all these other questions, even about devolution, could be addressed in that process. But don't you think there's a risk for the deputy president coming out so boldly to actually say no to such a push for referendum at this point? There's so many questions, it is the kind of conversation that Kenyans should be allowed to have, whether or not you want to change the devolution system, whether or not you want to change the structure of the executive. For the deputy president to come out as a one man who's against all this, don't you think there's a risk for him politically?
I do not think there's a risk, and one of the things that needs to be debunked is that it is a Deputy President William Ruto agenda only. When President Uhuru Kenyatta was speaking in London, when he had attended the Commonwealth meeting, in one of the sidelines interviews, he actually mentioned that the handshake was about unity and cohesion and nothing else. And one of the things that as there is actually this misconception around the handshake that it meant more than two leaders coming together, realizing that the nation was divided, and that by presenting a united front, then you're uniting the country. That was the purpose of the handshake. But now taking it down to the extent of now starting to assume that there is also an idea of alliance, of creating, expanding executive and everything, then you miss the point. Because again, when the Deputy President speaks to say that he does not support the idea of the referendum, he speaks from a very specific point of view, that the current referendum push is to change the structure of the executive, and the zero draft that is ostensibly being adopted is the one which is being fronted by MP from Baringo East Tiati, Kamket, which actually, amongst other things, suggests that they scrap the office of the Deputy President. So you'd understand where he speaks from. But again, the issue is this. I think from a governance point of view, a referendum, a constitution belongs to the people. It is not an elite. So if you look at the constitution and you say we want to craft a referendum question with the intention of satisfying one person's political agenda, then you lose the point. I do not think there is an overwhelming citizen need that emanates from the citizens that we need to change the constitution at this point, and specifically to alter the issue of the structure of the executive. If we could have said maybe we want to change the constitution and reduce the number of MPs, maybe the Deputy President will have had a different view. But on the specific issue of altering and expanding the structure of the executive, I think is opposed to that. And one of the things that now needs to be looked at is that when the Deputy President speaks, he does not speak alone most of the times. It's only that maybe when he speaks, he's only seen as himself. But as the party in Jubilee, and I've seen how they conduct themselves, it's that it is something, I have not seen any factioning or any other dissident voice within Jubilee which is saying, I support the referendum. Yes. Therefore, going forward, I think the national priorities at this point, as the President has said, when he talks about the Big Four, just so that I finish, he says, I'm dedicating my energies and my focus and everything else to the Big Four and nothing else. We have other constitutional and regulatory also issues that we need to do within these 5 years. We need to do a census. We need to conduct boundaries delimitation. We have the whole issue of environment, which is really a big deal in Kenya. Devolution has to be attended to, and the President has the Big Four. So an election, a referendum involves an election. Elections in Kenya are divisive. They are protracted, and they are also distract national attention from development. If Kenya continues on this perpetual electioneering mode, then we may never sit down and actually focus on elections. So my view is that if we must have a referendum, then let's have it as a 7th ballot in 2022, not right now. We can have it as a referendum question as part of 2022.
Why are you so keen on ensuring that the referendum does not happen before 2022, just before it comes?
Yeah, because I've mentioned that there are, first of all, national priorities which need to be taken care of. If we go to a referendum right now, I assure you, we lose 2 years, at least 2 years, of national attention, national time, and focus on the issues and the matters that really affect the bread and butter issues of Kenyans. Yes. So first of all, my point is that it does not emanate from the citizenry that we really need. We do not have a constitutional moment in Kenya that we really need a push for a constitution.
Is it a fact that we've gauged the national mood and we can tell whether or not the people really want this referendum or not? Because that's what Bwana Kipkule seems to suggest, that the country does not want a referendum. But we've not really given them time to actually understand and say, no, we don't want a referendum.
I think, first and foremost, you look at the two leaders when they met, they seem to have given a lot of preeminence to national conversation, which I think is the right thing to do, honestly. And therefore, trying to pull everyone on board and say, every time we get out of an election as Kenya, we get out of an election in a very bad way. So going forward, how do we cure this problem? That calls for national conversation. And the fact that Kenya's diversity, we must appreciate it, because that's what we are as Kenya. That's what defines Kenyans. And therefore, looking at the aspect of inclusivity is one of the key issues that has possibly made us get out of elections in a very bad way and say, how can we cure this problem once and for all? So I think that national conversation, if it leads us to a referendum, so be it. So that we sort out the issue of getting, what would be the point of going to an election in 2022 and we get out of the again, Kenya polarized and in danger. So we'd rather sort out now the issues now. So that as we go to 2022, I'm telling you, my brother here, if as a Kenyan, and everyone can tell you from the region, when Kenya gets into an election or election is coming, it's like there's a very big animal coming and we don't know how to cure this problem. So how do we get out of this? So it's to look for a mechanism or framework that will ensure that Kenyans get out of elections and things continue as normal. This is my take. And I can tell you for free, maybe time will tell. President Uhuru Kenyatta could be the last executive president in Kenya going forward. I see a situation where a referendum may be called upon, and therefore we come and say, let us now change to parliamentary system, where now a prime minister will be elected by members of National Assembly. If now a prime minister is elected by members of National Assembly, there will be no these issues of stolen election and stuff, and there will be simply a ceremonial president. Now, that one now cures a problem of now we are getting out of an election and Kenyans are fighting. And I think that is where we are heading to. What the deputy president,
what the deputy president is trying to
that is what I'm
that
coming.
He would become
Yes, now that is what I'm coming into. I think deputy president, and he has a right to do so, depending on the MOU he had with his boss, maybe he will be supported. But now he can see now things could be changing. What I would want to tell him is that to understand the dynamism of issues as we move forward and look at the bigger picture for this country. It's not about who serves at what position. For your information, the new constitution was meant to ensure that, in fact, there's not so much powers of issue or tribes fighting and saying it's our turn to become the president. It was meant to devolve resources to an extent that nobody even cares what is happening at the national level. But even up to now, people are fighting and say, it is our turn, it is our turn, it is this tribe. How do we sort out and come out of this problem as Kenyans?
Okay.
So I think a referendum could be there. It could be, to me, it should be even be happening before the next. It should be the first thing before we even do an election.
Friend, just before we lose
Yes,
the point, in the statement that the joint statement that President Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga read on the stairs of Harambee House, just to paraphrase what he said, actually to read it verbatim. In the past, we have given a lot of attention to institutional reforms in the hope that this could lift us to the next level of nationhood and make us a blessed land. What he was saying was that for a very long time, the only remedy that Kenyans have always thought over time and again is change, reforms and change. But our problem has been a challenge of values and ethos, which is why the spirit of the handshake was unity and national cohesion, not to satisfy the individual selfish needs, but actually to lead Kenyans toward a conversation of nationalism and Kenyanness. Therefore, the Unity Pact itself, the handshake itself was not for a referendum, because a referendum is about reform. But here they're talking about, for years, we've been misapplying the same thing, the same result. How many times, Kenya is the most legislated country in the world, and some of the most legislated. So I do not think that a change in the constitution is actually what we need right now. What we need is focusing our attentions on the bread and butter issues of our country. The reason why Kenyans are manipulated along ethnic lines and everything else is because, first of all, poverty. You come to them as a messiah and you tell them, I'll sort your problems. If you don't address the development needs of Kenyans right now, then no matter how many reforms you put into place, so long as Kenyans exist in that position where they're like Karl Marx's, the ones who are at the lowest level, then the proletariat, then there is nothing that's going to be done. So the development issues need to take precedence. If we address the bread and butter issues of Kenyans, they may be able to engage our leaders on a more enhanced and advanced platform of issues rather than what we have now, the primary issue of ethnicity.
And that should be after 2022.
Yeah, after.
I think myself that on this particular one, we may have to chew gum and scale the stairs at the same time. It is a problem we have postponed, and we cannot push it to 2022. I disagree with my colleague here that the handshake itself excluded the possibility of a referendum. Having said that, let me say this, that we need to debunk this misnomer that in order to expand the executive, we need necessarily to change the constitution. I am of the persuasion that you do not need a constitutional referendum in order to create the position of a prime minister. And I'm not talking here about an executive prime minister. Under Article 152, and the articles, the chapter of the executive that allows the president to create the executive, you do not need a referendum to call one of the ministers prime minister. He did not need a constitutional change to create what I think was a deputy minister when they created the CAS. There was no constitutional referendum that was needed. But then beyond the issue of national cohesion, there were a number of things also that they talked about. And it's good that when we read that statement, we read it in its entirety. They put into perspective the fact that we have been doing things the same way and expecting different results. So let us try and sit down and see what are we doing wrong. And they isolated a number of things. They've talked about electoral justice. So when they talk about electoral justice, they talked about the possibility that we also need to think, why do we go to this cycle every 5 years of violence? They also talked about inclusive government. How do we talk about it? And I think it's important that we go back to Okoa Kenya draft that was thrown out by IEBC. We never got to a referendum. There was a very good provision in there that we were thinking would be able to sort out not only government. We think of government and positions that are elective in terms of president and deputy president, but go to the horizontal and vertical parts of government, both at the lower and the higher levels. There was a provision and a proposal in the Okoa draft that no more than 30% of positions in civil service and in non-government agencies should go to one single community. There was also something we toyed around with there, that we need to have a minimum threshold of people in marginalized communities, that they must have a certain minimum reserve for them. Let it be said that the Pokomos don't have 3% that they can put in government, but a minimum threshold that is put into them. That's a conversation that I saw they contemplated in this text of the memorandum that they put. So we need to look at the entire thing positively. If it does end us into a referendum, so be it. But I did not see that in that handshake they excluded the possibility that we should have
it. So it was not expressly excluded.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, our time is up, but I'll give you, of course, a moment for final remarks. It is Monday today. So going forward, the discussion last week was very different. We were talking about IEBC today. I cannot find IEBC anywhere in the dailies. It appears the nation has moved on from IEBC. So even as you make your final comments, kindly also be kind enough to tell us what should we expect on the headlines this week.
Fine. I think on the discussion of referendum and so forth, and the statement that my brother is reading, I think, and on the 2nd of May, remember, the President Uhuru is supposed to be addressing the nation, and he'll be trying to unpack this handshake and telling Kenyans what it meant. To me, I think it's an issue of balance, and I think that is what Kenyans will be expecting to see. The handshake meant possibly was the issue of referendum one of the issues in this, or was the issue of what the Deputy President is saying? To me, going forward, I see a very tricky balance in this by the President, and everyone is waiting to see how he balances these two. To me, he must come out very boldly and say, Kenya is bigger than all of us, and therefore we should now focus on a institution where we get Kenya out of this mess we always getting into an election. So what is reading, I think, is the face value of the statement. But the intrinsic value of it, we'll be waiting to see what comes out. But I see a situation where we are likely to go into a referendum before 2022. Where IBC is very unfortunate, and I think that is what possibly NASA kept on saying, even before after elections of August and after again October. It's very unfortunate now these things are coming out, because the commissioners themselves not even understanding, even not speaking in one voice. And I think everyone seems to be now saying and confirming that indeed IBC had a lot of issues and could not even be, should not have been entrusted with conducting this election. And even though we are going for a referendum, actually the statement, what people are saying is that we cannot entrust this IBC in its current composition to conduct a referendum. And that is why I see a situation where IBC is being moved out, because we must go into a referendum that is very fair. And no Kenyan, I can tell you for free, can entrust the current IBC in its composition to run a referendum.
Do you expect the referendum or whether or not we'll have a referendum to feature in the headlines this week?
I see that obviously happening, a lot of things. What will be coming this week, I think, is much of the issues of Devolution Conference. Again, we'll be seeing President Uhuru will be coming back from Commonwealth, and therefore what are the issues. Number two, of course, again, we'll be getting into the issue of IBC and the way forward. And of course, now 1st of May is coming here, Labor Day, and people will be looking at the issues of workers. Okay. And actually what it is that Kenya and the government is doing for Kenyan workers. Okay. You heard the story of a union of police. I tell you, that could be also be coming out.
And it is a discussion that will definitely be happening.
Definitely, and I can tell you for free, I support that. Because countries like South Africa, even UK, police, they have police unions. So and that should be the way to go.
Should police officers be unionized?
It should be unionized. Even members of parliament should be unionized. Okay. They should be unionized. And I tell you that's the way.
They're loud enough to represent.
No, they don't have. Can I tell you? They are casualized. There are only members in parliament in the world who don't get house allowance. You can confirm that.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. I'm being informed by my director that yes, the President Uhuru Kenyatta is already back in Kenya. Yeah. He arrived back home, I think, at midnight.
Yeah, last night.
Yes. Charles Kipkule, your final comment?
My final comments, I think on devolution, I think we are looking forward to very good outcomes from that. On the IBC, I do not think this conversation is over. It's going to be back soon because we still have a problem. 3 commissioners are refusing to leave. And I think they just want to cling on and maybe negotiate a payoff. But one of the things we need to make an example out of this is that we cannot keep on rewarding incompetence. If you have failed in your duty, they didn't tell us and all ransom Kenyans and say that that we failed, but you want to be paid for the remainder of our terms. So the IBC is not yet out of our radar. Of course, the State of the Nation address is coming. Meshima has mentioned the issue of the labor issues will come up because Atwoli has already spoken. He's already started speaking on issues. He's coming back. So we are positioning ourselves from that. And on the issue of the handshake, one of the things that is actually an expectation from my side is that when the conversation ended at that level, the president appointed Ambassador Kimani, and I think former Prime Minister Raila Odinga appointed Paul Mwangi to head that unity office. So these are the 2 gentlemen that should actually come and tell Kenyans what is the roadmap. Going forward from here, this is what we're going to do out of the result of the Unity Pact, and then from there, a lot of misconceptions around the handshake will be debunked at that level.
Okay, thank you, Charles. Finally, Anthony Lodge.
I expect that the issue about Matiba and his burial will feature prominently. I think it is unfortunate for me that we glorify people when they have died. I think one of the things I should expect that in the State of the Nation address, we should find space, or the President should find space to give a national apology. Speaking about handshake, I think former President Moi, and I know he's in his tiring last years, should, on behalf of the Kenyans and on behalf of the regime then, have looked for an opportunity to issue a national apology and extend some kind of healing process as a result of what they did. So I think that will feature. I think the IBC issue is not going away. Chiloba is still in court, and I think this drama will play out. Akombe just issued, I think we saw somewhere, her report, which seems to confirm, or she seems to think that the unfoldings in IEBC now confirms the reasons through which she resigned. I think lastly for me, the Devolution Conference, it's going to be the big news this week, and the fact that His Excellency Raila will be gracing it will give it that much needed punch and panache, and I think we're looking for the opportunity where the two I think finally will be able to tell us who forms the team of this handshake, and that they can pack this handshake and we get on to the next level of it.
Wow, thank you so much, Anthony. You'll watch MP Mathare constituency, Charles Kipkule, political commentator, and Peter Mathuki, Wiper Party Secretary General, helping us look at the headlines.